community contributor from New Zealand. Thank you so much for joining us, Lynn. Really appreciate. And stage is yours. Please share your screen. And I will
Okay,
be here on backstage, and I will be helping after your session in question answers. Thank you so much.
thank you. Thanks for our interaction. Okay, good day, everyone. The session that I would like to present today is about debugging the flows and how to get a flow run when we want to find out a particular flow run related to this record or a row using the GUID. So before we get started, let me introduce myself a little bit, just in case if you're not aware of who I am. Um, my name is Lin Win. I am currently working as a technical architect in the Delta Insights, and I'm based in the Wellington, New Zealand. So the same as Rami, who was present from the previous session. So I'm Microsoft Business Application MVP, and my main focus is Dynamics 365. And after that, I use the Power Automate Cloud Flows to automate the systems and replace the classic workflows. And I use, obviously, since we're users of Dynamics 365, I'm familiar with the more driven app, and I started using the Canvas apps to enhance the user experience in the systems. While I'm not working on all these stuff, I do the community contributions by blogging. I do the forum participations by answering forum questions, and also speaking at the user groups and the conferences like this. So you can follow me on my Twitter, and if you want to find out more about what I'm up to. And if you are really keen to get the slides before the the organizers shares with all you all, so you can just download from this URL, shorten URL. You can scan this QR code and download the slides, because some of the slides contain the links to my blog post, which is more detailed step-by-step solutions for this kind of um, approach that I was trying to explain and demo in the this session. And while I'm not doing work or when I'm not doing any community contribution, I play games, mostly solo games, not online games because I suck at it. And I watch anime. I like anime. It is my guilty pleasure. I can binge watch 2, 3 seasons without doing anything. Okay, let's move on with the session. So as we briefly explained, we have already done the speaker introduction and what the session is about. And the first part of this session is the debugging tips, and what are the tips to test with the recent flow runs, and how to log and how to do the some mostly around tips and tricks for the debugging all the flows. And the second part of this session is about finding the flow run. As I mentioned, is when we want to try and debug, when we want to find out what happened with this particular record or row, and we want to see what are the changes, and what is the flow run particular to this flow. So this record, so that we want to figure out what happened in this particular flow run. So there are multiple approaches, like finding out the manual and exporting the history or on the main flow. So I'll try to explain all in this session, and we'll conclude with the Q&A session. So if you have any questions at the end, you can ask me in this chat box. Okay, so the first session is this about the debugging tips and just tip and tricks, especially around the Microsoft Dataverse connector, because I came from the Dynamics 365 developer background. And hope you all are using the recent flow run history, like when you want to re-trigger and test your flow, you normally use this test instead of trying to re-trigger the tree. For example, if your flow is triggering on create of the account and you want to test and some things is not right, you want to do it again instead of creating another account, you can rerun the previous step. And if you're doing that, you don't have to like save. You can just go and test and select and click save and test. That will basically just save your flow first and then test it at the same time. So you don't have to just do it um, like you know, one step after another. So the second step is that using the compose as a logging. So what it means is when you want to, sometimes you want to see what goes wrong in your flow. For especially, for example, this in this particular flow, you have two conditions. The first one is we're having the listing all accounts and checking how many accounts and records are there. And the first account is let me share the flows to show you the condition. Okay, so the first one is um, like first is the length of the list records is greater than 0. That means it will run if there's any more than one record in the result. And the second condition is checking the owner value of the first records account is equal to this particular GUID. And in that case, um, if you just have run this flow, sometimes it goes and sometimes it goes this way, and you don't really know like which parameter, which condition goes wrong. And it is especially it is if it is a simple formula, simple expression, you can just look at and go through the output of the previous step and check what could go wrong. But imagine if you have a big chunk of expression with a 4 or 5 formula, and it will be a bit hard to check which ones go wrong. So you can create a compose like this to check what happened. So if you run this, you can see the count is particular value, and this um, if I go and check in the flow run history, I have a value for a flow run for this particular one. Okay, so if I run this, and you can see there's a account is 0 and this particular flow run GUID, and we can check why it is not going into this false condition, because the GUID is empty, and that's why it is going to the other condition. So that is how you can use as a compose as a logging functionality, but make sure that you just remove this after your developments, because uh, having those unnecessary steps in your flow will consume the API consumption. So uh, it's unnecessarily calling one API request. So just in case if your organization tenant is exceeding the API request limits. So another one is show raw outputs. So let's go into and check this one. For example, if I see list all accounts, and if I want to see the output of this particular step, there will be a hyperlink. And if I click on it, I can see the JSON output of this particular step. Simple. But sometimes the flow designer doesn't show, and it just show as a status reason 200. In that case, you don't know like, okay, what is the output for this particular step. It happens mostly when the result returned from the flow step is very low, like 1 or 2 records. That's what I observe, and they have added this functionality, the show raw outputs, where you can see the actual JSON output of this particular step. So this is for just in case if you are stuck with the status reason 200, you can see, click on the show raw outputs to see the actual flow, the output of this flow step. And another one is my favorite, where I use a lot as I developed. When I do the flow development. Imagine if have this um, kind of steps. Um, okay, so let's say we have this flow. Okay, we will list all accounts and we will just delete, and we will just do the rest. And if we want to make sure that the list step returns all data, because once you delete it, you can't you'll have to recreate all these data. And so we just want to make sure the first few steps are correct before we move on to the next steps. So in that case, I just put a terminate step and terminates the steps with the succeed states, so that the flow will stop working. So the rest, it will not process the rest of the steps. So you have to take care, beware the using the terminate steps if you are have a parallel branch in your flow step, because once the flow hit the terminate step, it will just stop. So even if the other parallel branch is still running, it will just stop, and you might not it might not be the desired outcome that you're looking for. So um, if you're not fine with running the terminate action because you have the parallel branch or something, you can use this configure run after. So configure run after is, let's imagine we have this three steps. We have list all records and we have this long running process, for example. Instead, we have some steps which are taking 3-4 minutes to run, so you don't want to debug it that step. So you put all of these into the one scope, and you want to run the rest of the steps, for example. In that case, what you have to do is you have to change the configure run after of this scope to like something else, so that we know that these steps will be successful, so that you choose something else like fail or timeout or escape, so that it will just skip this long running process. And once it's skipped this long running process, what we want to do is we want to also run the next step to make sure that we will run this when the flow step this skip from long running process. So we change this to is successful or is skip. Okay, so let's try and run this flow. Okay, so as you can see, it just ran all these steps, and this is step has been the whole step scope has been skipped because it has been set to long after run after this one is skipped, but it didn't skip, so this one has been skipped, and it processed the rest of the steps. So that's another way of running skipping the flow step for during the testing. Another one is conditional control. The conditional control is simple. You want to um, let's just so let's say if we have this delete step, right? So we don't want to run this delete step in um, for temporarily during the testing. So just create a dummy condition. So let's say one is equal to one, so it will always go through this yes route. So you just put it into the no step, so that this step will never run. So it is more like for developers, you're commenting the code so that the compiler wouldn't run this part of the code because it's never gonna meet this condition. And the last one, the second last one is copying to the clipboard. So copying to the clipboard is a bit dangerous, as in um, I just want to, let's say, don't want to run this one, so I can copy this to a clipboard and delete it. Okay, so and once I delete it, I just try the test flow, and when I come back and I want to re-edit this back, I just edit back from the clipboard. So this is a bit dangerous, as in, let's say your browser crash and you move away from this step suddenly close, you might not be able to re-edit back. The clipboard in your flow, the memory in the flow step has lost, or sometimes what I notice is the my clipboard editing from the clipboard is sometimes inconsistent. It is sometimes show as a gray out, and I'm not able to add this particular step. So it might be tricky to use this way. And the last one is the static result. So the static result means you're setting this particular step as a return a static value instead of actually running. So if you don't want to run this list all accounts, you can say it as the static result. So once you enable the static result, this flow step will always return as a succeed status, and it will just uh, bypass this step because it's always successful, but without actually running and without actually returning the output of the result. So you can see this icon. So that means this action has been static result has been configured for this step. Okay, that's all regarding with this debugging flows. So I'll move on to the next session around finding the flow run. So finding the flow run is the first one is just simple. It's just manually. So let's say if I want to um, let's find a record that we want to find a flow run. Okay, so we have this records. Oh, this are the contact records created. Let me go to the account one. Um, so this particular flow run history, if you go into this edit mode, you can see this flow runs when the contact row is added. Okay, so if we want to find when the contact row is added, and what we want to do is that there are like so 8 flow runs happened on the last 3 days ago and July of 29, and we want to find out the flow run particular to one of the contact that created on that day. So let's find the contacts created on, it was 29 of July. Okay, so we have these records, right? Imagine we have this 8 records and there's 8 flow runs. Sometimes if they're just a few minutes apart, we can actually figure out based on the time. But now that everything is on like 23, 22, 24, we can actually say which one is which. In that case, let's say if I want to find out the desk contact 10, if I want to find out this records, the GUID of this record. Okay, so just copy this rec record GUID and we'll try to find, let's say, start from here. Wow, run history is a bit slow today. While I'm loading this, let me just open up a few others in the background so that we can just go one after another. So what we're going to basically do is in the flow run history, if you expand the output of the trigger, you can see the particular record UID. So if we have this contact UID, the contact UID will be contained in the GUID of the. Okay, so when we go and find there's no result. Okay, so if we go that and find over here, you see, and there's a contact. It is contained in the contact UID as well as the internal ID. So item internal ID is the just for their internal use, but it is always the main GUID of the role, no matter if it is a contact ID or account ID or incident ID. So that is how you can manually find based on the GUID by triggering that. But it can be a bit tricky if you are like dozens of flow runs. In that case, what you can do is you can just download the flow run history and find it. So let's go to this all run, flow run history, and get the CSV file. So the logic is the same. Instead of we're just going through one by one flow run, what we're going to do is we will find this GUID in the CSV file. So before we run this CSV file, expand the headers a little bit and make the freeze the top row so that we know which row that we're looking for. So what you need to find is this run link, so the column F. So once you get this run link, what you can do is you can just open up this URL, which will basically the same one that we found over here. So that is how you can find the flow run using the exporting the history of the CSV file. So yeah, there's containing the slide. So even if you review the slides, you know what I I was presented in the session, and you can find out more details in the blog post as mentioned in the bottom of this slide. And but this finding this flow run using this way is a bit limited because sometimes it can be the flow run may not be uh, like some of this is only allows you to download like 100 or certain number of flow runs. So if you are looking way back from the flow run history from like 3 weeks ago, you may not able to achieve with this approach. In that case, another solution that I have is the finding flow run using the on-demand flow. So if you want to set it up by your own, you can just follow the steps mentioned in this blog post. For now, I will try to explain the that particular flow. So this is what the parameters are just the flow name, the name of the flow, and this record UID. So record UID can be um, the, the 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 GUID of this contact records, something like this. And um, so if you want to manually test and run, so the GUID of the record will be something like this, and the name of the flow will be something like this, right? So this is the parameters for this particular on-demand flow. So the first thing it does is actually just getting this flow, the name of the flow, and find the raw flow unique ID. So the unique ID of this particular flow. And after that, what it does is it populates the environment name. So the environment name is something like this one, but you don't have to worry about it. It contains in the workflow the text parameter, and this flow name is this workflow unique name, a unique ID that I retrieved from the step earlier. And I want to try to explain this is a custom connector. So I just referenced this custom connectors from Stephen's blog, and you can also find out how to set up this custom connector in the in the in my blog post. So mostly it's just a host calling this API flow. One disclaimer: this particular custom connector and this API, it is not documented and officially announced by Microsoft. So you have to use it at your own risk. You can still use it as debugging and um, investigation of your flows, but probably definitely not um, for your production use for certain mission critical stuff. So they may change it anytime and it may break if they have changed. So it is just basically calling the API flow.microsoft and just pass the environment name, the GUID of the environment, and this flow name, the workflow ID, and get the runs. So, and the API version is currently hard-coded. And once you're there, it just pass the output parameters in the JSON. And for each flow run, so the flow runs only contains like a trigger. So it doesn't contain it only contains this kind of URL. So it doesn't contain this trigger input or trigger output. So once we get this URL, what we have to do is we have to call to the HTTP request URI, and then once it returns and it contains the value of the internal item ID, the ones that I mentioned just now, the internal ID is the ID, the GUID of this trigger record. So this particular one. So if it is matching with the one that we're looking for in this particular GUID record ID parameter, and then it will just add it into the array. So what that means is if you have a multiple flow triggering for the same row or same records, it will just be added into this array. And towards the end, you can just compose or you can just log it somewhere and try it for your troubleshooting purpose. So this is how you can find the flow run with another on-demand flow. But sometimes where it's quite troublesome to set these up and do the troubleshooting, and we wish we had the ability to have the background uh, process history, just like how we had used to have in the classic workflow. And we can actually run it, like log it by our own, before Microsoft provide this kind of functionality, but it involves around a lot of flows and a lot of steps to achieve this kind of thing. And we can use it as a custom activity so that it can be related to any regarding to any record type or table. So the first one is the logging flow run history, which is logging like everything, whether it's a status successful or fail, everything. So this is just a demo purpose, how it can be achieved. But so there are two steps. One is the having the whole thing built in each and every flow, and the second one is just create a child flow and reuse it in the your your multiple cloud flows. Okay, so the first one is so let's imagine we have this kind of logic and put all this logic in one main scope, and we'll branch it out to the three, whether it's a successful or fail or timeout, so that it will just log the status accordingly. And this step is just to like check the error log from this scope. Let's sometimes the this particular step throw an error, sometimes this particular step throw an error, but the scope doesn't have like the static parameter to show the all types of error. So I had to like get the multiple ways of getting the errors by looping through the result array. And if there's any error message, I just log it into the error. And another one is just to check the based on the trigger STA message log whether this flow trigger based on the create, update, or delete action. And then we create the new flow run. So it will create the new records, something like something like this. So it will create a flow run record. So this is the custom activity. And if the flow is triggered by the user, so let's say the user ran the on-demand flow and all this stuff, so it will just add this user as the owner. If it is not a delete event, so the record is still there, the creator event, update events, then we will set the regarding of this flow run so that it will show up in this um, the subgrid for this particular record. And then we end with the same status. What it means is if the flow step above fails, so it goes to this route, just run here also we have to end with the fail status. Otherwise, all of the flow run history that you can see, you will see that as the everything is successful because we handle that error exception in the steps earlier. So another one is using the child flow. This one is a little bit more simple. So it it is just quite similar step. It get the SDK message and try to check whether what is the trigger for this flow, whether it's a create, update, or delete. And oh, and the input of this flow is the workflow and the trigger. So these are the two main inputs, and we're just parsing the JSON, and we create the flow run just like in the this particular one. We just create the flow run, and the same thing. We just um, check if it is triggered by the user, and then return its the result back to the main flow. So how we're using this is we just this is the main the actual flow, and we have this flow and the steps below. We just need to add these two steps. So if you have 10 flows, instead of going at this big chunk each and every flow, you just add these two steps in this flow, which is going to log at the beginning of the flow. So since it is logging at the beginning of the flow, it doesn't really log the status of the flow. So let's say um, your flow has a fail from here, it's fail or it's just timeout. It can capture because this is making it as a generic and it is running at the beginning of the flow. But what it does is, so just the first one is calling the child flow from this step, this child flow, and the second one is setting the regarding of this child flow. So this is just because Dataverse connector have multiple fields for each table types, so that we can really make it generic. So we have to include this step in this um, in the main flow instead. We can make it generic, but no, that will involve a really big expression. So well, yeah, that's all about the in my presentation, running with the chat flow. And okay, thanks for coming here today and attending the session. So if you have any questions, I'll look through the comments and I'll answer them all. Mm, okay, I don't see any comments for this session. Okay, let's just wait for the organizer.
Hi, Lynn.
Hi.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Mustajab is here, and from here to onward, I will be handing over to Mustajab. Uh,
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for
that was really
handing this
awesome
up.
session. I was following your blog posts about flow history, maybe of last week.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I was looking have a similar issue. I was thinking basically to develop something, and I
Mm.
searched and found your post. That was really nice, and I found it really helpful.